motion picture industry is about to be shaken up again. Like I said, in the year 1915, right between the publishing of Oscar Micheaux's two novels, we get the release of this film, D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. This film was based on a book by Thomas Dixon called The Klansman, and it dealt with the era of Reconstruction, the era that lasted from 1865 to 1877. The movie also dealt with the Civil War, what it was like before the Civil War in the South, from the perspective of white Southerners. This film was seminal in a lot of ways, in that a lot of film students today still watch it because D.W. Griffith introduced a number of techniques in this film. Number one, it was one of the longest films I've produced up to this time. It's a 3-hour runtime. He introduced things like the close-up chase scenes, different lighting techniques and camera shots that hadn't been seen to this point. So this was epic in scale, this movie. And when it was viewed at the White House by then President Woodrow Wilson, he described it as history written in lightning. So for white folks watching this film, it wasn't just entertainment. For them, it was a telling of history. And the history that they were trying to tell was the white perspective of what the Reconstruction period was. So, stepping back, what Reconstruction was historically, after the South lost the Civil War, the North occupied the South. Northern troops occupied the South. So, Africans are freed, beginning with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, and then solidified with the 13th Amendment. And the Northern troops were there to ensure that the rebellious class of the South, those whites that had seceded and formed the Confederacy, no longer had political power, and that the newly freed Africans would be given the franchise, given the right to vote, given political power. And when they did so, we get the first 22 African Americans in Congress, we get 2 black senators, and we also get a black governor during this time. And what these men did in government, they set up some of the South's first public schools. They oversaw the rewriting of Southern constitutions to make them more equal. They really did. It was a high point of black political progress in the country. I mean, these are ex-enslaved people who are now given the right to vote, and they did so admirably. They were able to use political power, combine it with economic power. Black folks had access to land and ownership, and it was a good time to be black in the South. And again, they weren't discriminatory. They even helped the poor whites by setting up school systems that helped everybody. So the Reconstruction period was one of true democracy in the American South that you wouldn't see again, because it ends in 1877 when the Northern troops pull out and those white Confederates are able to get political power again, and then they use their terrorist organizations like the White Camilla Army and most famously the Ku Klux Klan to uh, reestablish their power and disenfranchise black folks. And the democracy that we saw in the South during Reconstruction, we wouldn't see again until really after 1965 and the Voting Rights Act, so almost 100 years. Uh, but from the perspective of whites during this period, this was in the South, this was the worst period possible. Your former property, the people that you considered no more than animals, now have political power and political control. And the idea that you would have to respect them as human beings was disturbing to many of the whites in the South. And once they got political power, and again, they instituted a reign of terror throughout the region, which caused that migration that we talked about earlier. So, D.W. Griffith's film, this 3-hour film, what it showed Reconstruction as a time where there's scenes in this film of black people Most of them are white actors in blackface, but there actually are a few black extras in this movie where it shows black people in the political chambers of the South and the congressional halls of the South, acting buffoonish and eating chicken in Congress and uh, drinking and being corrupt and passing laws like we're going to make interracial marriage legal, and passing laws that say that white people have to bow to black officers throughout the South. All these things that would infuriate a white audience and show that Reconstruction was a horrible idea and was just a time of corruption and inept black people that should never have political control running the government. And the worst aspect of the film was the idea that what Reconstruction did was it let loose the passions of these black men that all they wanted to do was to rape white women. And the villain of the film was a black named Gus who was attempting to rape a white woman, and she jumped off a cliff before he could do anything to her. And the ultimate scene in the film is the glorious Ku Klux Klan riding into the town and capturing this Negro and lynching him. And this was played throughout the United States. This was one of the first blockbuster films of all time. And the membership of the Ku Klux Klan rose tremendously all over the country, all over the Midwest, the West, and even in the North after the release of this film, because they're presented as the conquering heroes that are going to set things right in the South, make things like they were before this horrible period of Reconstruction. So after this film was released in 1915, we see the black community respond with protests. Um, the black press writes a number of reports about this film. They try to get it not to be shown, but to no avail it is. But ultimately, black leadership at the time, led by Booker T. Washington, decides that, you know what, we have been confronted with these negative portrayals of black humanity throughout the stage and now on film. The best way to counter this is to produce our own films that tell our own story, uh, to show that we're not animals, we're not rapists, we're not these type of things. And that was the push in 1915, was to uh, show black people on film the way that would, in a way that would express their humanity in a way that was controlled by black people. So Oscar Micheaux was contacted by the Johnson brothers. They were one was an actor, black actor in Hollywood. The other was a businessman in the Midwest, and they wanted to start a film company. So they asked Oscar Micheaux to allow them to produce a film version of his 1917 novel, The Homesteader. And this is 1918 where they make this request to him. And Oscar Micheaux responds by saying, uh, I'll sell you the rights to the novel, but I want to direct the film. The Johnson brothers declined that request, so he decides he's going to make the film himself. So in 1919, he decides he's going to finance his own film company through the proceeds from his novels and create this film himself, which he does. His first film, The Homesteader, it comes out a year and a half after this request was made by the Johnson brothers to have his novel made into a movie. So Micheaux does it himself. He writes the screenplay. He directs it. He edits it. He markets the film all over the country using his connections that he made as a bookseller, and he is successful with this first film. Unfortunately, we don't have an intact copy of this film. I think there's some stills from the production, but we don't have the full length copy of it. His next endeavor is what we'll be watching, which is Within Our Gates from 1920. And just going back, his film was played in black theaters, like the one shown here in Indianapolis. This is the Madam C.J. Walker Theater. There's a documentary on Netflix right now about Madam C.J. Walker that talks about her. She was the first self-made female millionaire in the United States, black or white, and she, her daughter was able to take the money raised, earned by her mother, and she built this beautiful theater in Indianapolis, Black Theater in Indianapolis. And there were a number of these around the country that Micheaux would go to with his movie that and they would play. So in 1919, he starts filming Within Our Gates, and Within Our Gates is a direct answer to D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. It is a story of the race, is what he calls it. He deals with a number of themes: black education, uh, all aspects of black life that would actually get him in trouble with some people in the black community. Because the push after Birth of a Nation, the idea was we're going to make black films that show black people in the best possible light. Micheaux went in a little bit of a different direction. He says, I'm going to show black people doing well, but I'm also going to show all aspects of black society, the good, the bad, and everything in between. So he shows scenes of gambling, violence, but he also shows uh, black business people and educated black folks. So he shows the entire gamut of the black community. He has a scene in this film, and you'll see, of his thoughts on the black church. He talks about white philanthropy, which was big at the time. He talks about sharecropping and racism. And most importantly, he corrects the narrative that's presented in Birth of a Nation. The narrative that it's black men that are creating, engaging in sexual violence against white women. Where he shows in this film that in reality, it's the other way around, where black women since enslavement have been victims of sexual violence by white men. And he shows this in the film. This film was banned from a lot of white theaters and was banned in the South because of the scene that he shows in this film. So the main character is a black woman, and it follows her story. And it's a silent film that is one of the first full length films. It's about an hour and a half, black films. The themes in it are incredibly relevant, but I don't want to give too much of the film away before you have the chance to watch it. So I will ask this, and I'll include this on the email. Things to think about when viewing this movie. This movie came out in 1920, so are the themes that are found in the film still relevant today? How are different aspects of black society presented by Micheaux in the film? How are gender and class presented in this film? How does Micheaux portray the preacher in the film? That's a very important role. What does he do? And what comments can be made on the performances of the actors? Remember, this is a silent film, so they have to show a emotion and these things without talking. Uh, how do they do? How does it come across to you watching it with a lens of 2020, watching something from 100 years ago? So as you watch the film, keep these questions in mind, because this is what will guide our discussion on Friday. I'll present two links in the email to the film. That one is very high quality image wise. It's done by the Library of Congress, but there's no music attached to it. So it's just a silent film with the dialogue boxes. The other has music, which when you're watching it, the music goes up and down with the action of the film, and it's a little bit of a better viewing experience, but the image isn't as crisp as the first one. So I'll leave that to you to decide which one you want to watch, but it's the same material either way. Just one has music, so it might be more engaging. With that said, I hope this introduction gives you a good understanding of the importance of this film and the historical context in which it was made. And if you want more information on the course website that's attached to our discussions of these films, there are articles concerning this film and also concerning Oscar Micheaux and his significance to black filmmaking. So read those articles when you have a chance. Watch the film, and I look forward to discussing it with all of you on Friday at 8.